best for the present to suspend his hatred until the freshness of Agricola's renown and his popularity with the army should begin to pass away. For Agricola was still the governor of Britain. Accordingly, the emperor ordered that the usual triumphal decorations, the honour of a laurelled statue, and all that is commonly given in place of the triumphal procession, with the addition of many laudatory expressions, should be decreed in the Senate, together with a hint to the effect that Agricola was to have the province of Syria, then vacant by the death of Attilius Rufus, a man of consular rank, and generally reserved for men of distinction. It was believed by many persons that one of the freedmen employed on confidential services was sent to Agricola, bearing a dispatch in which Syria was offered him, and with instructions to deliver it should he be in Britain. That this freedman, in crossing the straits, met Agricola, and without even saluting him, made his way back to Domitian. Though I cannot say whether the story is true, or is only a fiction invented to suit the emperor's character. Meanwhile, Agricola had handed over his province in peace and safety to his successor, and not to make his entrance into Rome conspicuous by the concourse of welcoming throngs, he avoided the attentions of his friends by entering the city at night, and at night too, according to orders, proceeded to the palace, where, having been received with a hurried embrace, and without a word being spoken, he mingled in the crowd of courtiers. Anxious henceforth to temper the military renown, which annoys men of peace, with other merits, he studiously cultivated retirement and leisure, simple in dress, courteous in conversation, and never accompanied but by one or two friends, so that the many who commonly judge of great men by their external grandeur, after having seen and attentively surveyed him, asked the secret of a greatness which but few could explain. During this time he was frequently accused before Domitian in his absence, and in his absence acquitted. The cause of his danger lay not in any crime, nor in any complaint of injury, but in a ruler who was the foe of virtue, in his own renown, and in that worst class of enemies, the men who praise. And then followed such days for the Commonwealth as would not suffer Agricola to be forgotten, days when so many of our armies were lost in Moesia, Dacia, Germany, and Pannonia, through the rashness or cowardice of our generals, when so many of our officers were besieged and captured with so many of our auxiliaries, when it was no longer the boundaries of empire and the banks of rivers which were imperilled, but the winter quarters of our legions and the possession of our territories. And so when disaster followed upon disaster, and the entire year was marked by destruction and slaughter, the voice of the people called Agricola to the command, for they all contrasted his vigour, firmness, and experience in war with the inertness and timidity of other generals. This talk, it is quite certain, assailed the ears of the emperor himself, while affection and loyalty in the best of his freedmen, malice and envy in the worst, kindled the anger of a prince ever inclined to evil. And so at once, by his own excellencies and by the faults of others, Agricola was hurried headlong to a perilous elevation. The year had now arrived in which the proconsulate of Asia or Africa was to fall to him by lot, and as Civica had been lately murdered, Agricola did not want a warning, or Domitian a precedent. Persons well acquainted with the emperor's feelings came to ask Agricola, as if on their own account, whether he would go. First they hinted their purpose by praises of tranquillity and leisure, then offered their services in procuring acceptance for his excuses, and at last, throwing off all disguise, brought him by entreaties and threats to Domitian. The emperor, armed beforehand with hypocrisy, and assuming a haughty demeanour, listened to his prayer that he might be excused, and having granted his request, allowed himself to be formally thanked, nor blushed to grant so sinister a favour. But the salary usually granted to a proconsul, and which he had himself given to some governors, he did not bestow on Agricola, either because he was offended at his not having been asked, or was warned by his conscience that he might be thought to have purchased the refusal which he had commanded. It is indeed human nature to hate the man whom you have injured. Yet the emperor, notwithstanding his irascible temper and an implacability proportioned to his reserve, was softened by the moderation and prudence of Agricola, who neither by a perverse obstinacy nor an idle parade of freedom challenged fame or provoked his fate. Let it be known to those whose habit it is to admire the disregard of authority, that there may be great men even under bad emperors, and that obedience and submission, when joined to activity and vigour, may attain a glory which most men reach only by a perilous career, utterly useless to the state, and closed by an ostentatious death. The end of his life, a deplorable calamity to us and a grief to his friends, was regarded with concern even by strangers and those who knew him not. The common people in this busy population continually inquired at his house and talked of him in public places and in private gatherings. No man, when he heard of Agricola's death, could either be glad or at once forget it. Men's sympathy was increased by a prevalent rumour that he was destroyed by poison. For myself, I have nothing which I should venture to state for fact. Certainly, during the whole of his illness, the emperor's chief freedmen and confidential physicians came more frequently than is usual with a court which pays its visits by means of messengers. This was perhaps solicitude, perhaps espionage. Certain it is that on the last day the very agonies of his dying moments were reported by a succession of couriers, and no one believed that there would be such haste about tidings which would be heard with regret. Yet in his manner and countenance the emperor displayed some signs of sorrow, for he could now forget his enmity, and it was easier to conceal his joy than his fear. It was well known that on reading the will, in which he was named co-heir with Agricola's excellent wife and most dutiful daughter, he expressed delight, as if it had been a complimentary choice. So blinded and perverted was his mind by incessant flattery, that he did not know that it was only a bad emperor whom a good father would make his heir. Agricola was born on the 13th of June, in the 3rd consulate of Gaius Caesar. He died on the 23rd of August, during the consulate of Collega and Priscus, being in the 56th year of his age. Should posterity wish to know something of his appearance, it was graceful rather than commanding. There was nothing formidable in his appearance, a gracious look predominated. One would easily believe him a good man, and willingly believe him to be great. As for himself, though taken from us in the prime of a vigorous manhood, yet, as far as glory is concerned, his life was of the longest. Those true blessings, indeed, which consist in virtue, he had fully attained; and on one who had reached the honours of a consulate and a triumph, what more had fortune to bestow? Immense wealth had no attractions for him, and wealth he had, even to splendour. As his daughter and his wife survived him, it may be thought that he was even fortunate. Fortunate in that while his honours had suffered no eclipse, while his fame was at its height, while his kindred and his friends still prospered, he escaped from the evil to come. For, though to survive until the dawn of this most happy age and to see a Trajan on the throne was what he would speculate upon in previsions and wishes confided to my ears, yet he had this mighty compensation for his premature death, that he was spared those later years, during which Domitian, leaving now no interval or breathing space of time, but as it were with one continuous